Welcome back to Venture Crush. We're so glad to have you here. Happy New Year. A few announcements to get us started, and then we're going to jump right in. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Meredith Bouchon. I'm the senior partner in our emerging companies and venture capital group at Lowenstein. I'm based in New York, and I focus on M&A, buying and selling venture-backed companies. And today we're in person in New York. We're also in person in our Palo Alto office, which we're excited about. And we have a lot of you joining us on Zoom. And we have with us Karen Page, Elliot Robinson, and Jeff Busgang in that order, who you'll get to know. And we're going to be talking about going to market, scaling, and product market fit. Then we're going to have a special performance from Grammy-nominated Louis Cato, who you may know from Stephen Colbert's TV show, as well as award-winning folk artist and actress Amber Rubarth. And as we always do, we're going to have some really great wine in addition to other things to drink. We'll have snacks, and we'll have some time to get to know each other at the end. If you are in New York or Palo Alto in person, we do encourage you to join the Zoom chat. There's a QR code you can scan, but don't join the audio because that messes us up a little bit. In the chat there, it tends to be really active. Introduce yourself, share your LinkedIn, get to know each other. We're going to share a bunch there too, including panelist bios. You can drop your questions there. We will try to get to them. They are being fed up to us up here. And we're going to also tell you about some of our upcoming events in the Zoom chat and give you opportunities to RSVP. I'm personally really excited about a couple. We're going to tell you about a few in the Zoom chat, but upcoming we have our colleagues Amy Mouchouar and Carly Nixon. We're going to lead a discussion on raising safe digital citizens, and Laura Cicerelli and Eric Weiner on formation, founders, and early decisions. So, those are in the next couple months. We also have a team update to share, which is that our group has been joined by Matteo D'Asti in our ECVC practice in San Francisco. He brings 25 years of experience advising startups, growth companies, venture funds, both in the US and in Europe. With him joining, in addition to our new partner, Josh Cook in San Francisco, we continue to strengthen our San Francisco and Bay Area team and deepen our ties to the venture community. So that's been a really great addition in 2026. And so many of our colleagues helped us put this together. We could not do this without you, so thank you. And with that, before we get into our conversation, this is one of my favorite things we do at Venture Crush. Jeff Busgang, again, is going to give us a little mini lesson, some of what he teaches at Harvard about product market fit. So I'll throw it over to you.
Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you, Ed, for hosting us again and this incredible event. What a great crowd. Ed has tasked me every year with compressing a 2-year Harvard MBA in 6 minutes, 6 slides. And I'll do this for the price not of $160,000. So that's sort of our goal. And the slides, I hope, will be lined up and I can show them to you. Okay, amazing. So, when I teach a class to MBAs on this topic of product market fit. I've been teaching that class for 15 years. And in the last few years, I've had to completely reinvent that class in the age of AI. And I think we're going to talk about that a bit in this conversation. And many of you feel this, that we're in a very unique moment right now, product market fit journey. And my general theme on this is that there are a lot of incredible, timely tools for the product market fit journey, but there are also some timeless methods. And so the goal for entrepreneurs right now is to combine the timely tools, the modern AI tools that make things so much easier than ever before, with the timeless methods of building a great business and finding product market fit. So that's really the essence. I wrote this book that came out earlier last year on this concept of leveraging AI for the product market fit journey. And the core theme of the book is that today, modern founders are becoming just like the 10x developer that all of you try to hire in your startups, and maybe some of you are 10x developers. Those are the developers, of course, that are not 10%, 20%, 30% better than the average developer, but literally 10 times more productive. We're in an era of the 10x founder. And the markets are rewarding 10x founders like never before. In fact, later I'll steal a slide from some work that Elliot and the Bessemer team have done on this topic, where they did some analytics on what the actual charts look like for 10x founders and these companies that are executing at this incredibly high level. But that's really what all of you should be aspiring to. So how do you do that? So I said timeless methods, timely tools. Here's what the journey is. You have to take this notion, this mentality of a startup is an experimentation machine. When you're in that 0 to 1 journey, even the -1 to 0 journey, you are running a sequence of experiments, and you have to begin with the customer. That sounds very simple, but you have to really center yourself on the customer problem you're trying to solve and running a series of value prop experiments. The modern tools let you spin up MVPs faster than ever. People can literally use the vibe coding tools to build MVPs in an hour or two. Even former computer science people like myself who hasn't coded in 30 years can now build apps that can instantiate an idea and manifest it. And it's incredible what these tools are doing. But you have to really center yourself again on an important customer problem. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. Then you think about, okay, I've got this value prop experiments. I'm starting to see early signs of interest in my value prop. Now I have to run go-to-market experiments. What are the ways that I get that in front of my customers? There's a great line that a serial founder had a number of years ago, the founder of Twitch, Justin Kang, where he said, first-time founders are obsessed with product. Second-time founders are obsessed with distribution. And so you as founders can't just stop at build a great product. You have to obsess about distribution. And then the final step, which is so critical, especially for somewhat later stage investors like Karen and Elliot, where I'm at the seed stage, I can take risk on many of these elements, like business model risk and unit economics. You really have to think deeply about unit economics and business model and really run experiments, particularly in today's era of gross margin compression in the context of the underlying costs of the models. You really have to think deeply in a very sophisticated way about testing your business model. So value prop, then think about go-to-market, and then business model. In parallel to that, you have to build the organization that can run these experiments. You have to build a growth team, a product team, a go-to-market team, and you have to instrument that organization to be excellent at experiments. Today, that's really different than it was only a few years ago, because it used to be that the classic seed stage company would hire 8, 10, 12 folks, build a product, go to market, try to chase after that first $1 million of revenue, get the first pilot customers, scale from there. Today, modern AI founders who are 10x founders are doing this with 2 or 3 people and dozens of AI agents. Even more, I have a portfolio company that has 20 employees and 4,000 AI agents working for them. I have a belief that by the end of this year, all of you will be employing more AI agents than humans in your organizations, whatever the organization is that you work for. Even Ed and the Lowenstein team will have more AI agents than, God forbid, lawyers working for them. Because these tools are coming out with these capabilities and are getting easier and easier to use. And every week, the major models are launching these agentic capabilities. Just this week, Claude launched Cowork. That's the big next new incredible thing. Who knows what's coming next week and the week after with the latest from Gemini, OpenAI, and Grok. So we're seeing this idea of seed strapping, where founders are achieving way more with modest pre-seed or seed rounds and almost skipping the Series A and getting to a point where they're building a ton of momentum. Sam Altman has this incredible quote, which he made only 15, 16 months ago. When will we see the solopreneur that creates $1 billion company? Some of you may know the story last year of Base 44, which is one of the most popular vibe coding tools. Maor Shlomo, founder of Base 44, solopreneur, 8 months, built the company up to 4 or 5 million of revenue and was acquired by Wix for $80 million. Base 44, Maor Shlomo, he sells the company for $80 million. I just wrote a case on this company and the Wix acquisition. Why would Wix spend $80 million on a single founder? It's because he had this insight on how to build a company that hit this recursive moment where the software that he was building, the AI was building the AI. And that's where the moment we're in, where these companies now are beginning to hit these recursive moments that some founders are finding, where you can use your own tools to build your company. Every category is super crowded. We were talking about AI for legal. I happen to have a chart on AI for legal. This is real. Like every company you can imagine, every category you can imagine. So you as a founder, you have to find a way to cut through the clutter, both in the go-to-market with customers and in the financing conversations with investors. This conversation we have every day in our partnerships and every venture firm has is where are the competitive moats? Like you have to have a very clear view on your competitive moat. A handful of things that we talk about typically around proprietary data, last mile workflow, having a very clear sense of owning that system of record, the human AI interface, and then something that more and more we're talking about is, momentum and velocity is the moat. How fast are founders executing? We just started a new criteria in our partners meetings and evaluating startups. Typically we have the classic things, team, market, business model. We've now added founder velocity. Just how fast are founders executing on this point of, can you give us evidence that you're operating like a 10x founder? Just a couple things I'll say. The last thing I'll say is this is a stealing plagiarism is the sincerest form of flattery. This is an incredible. I'm a fanboy of a lot of all the Bessemer content. This is a recent AI market report they did last summer, and they coined a couple terms that I thought were very powerful. The traditional model in B2B software had previously been, let's see if you can grow at this rate known as triple, triple, double, double, which was coined by Neeraj Agarwal of Battery. So triple, triple, double, double was this idea that you could get to $1 million of revenue by founder selling and then grow from there to 3 million, 9 million, 18 million, 36 million, triple, triple, double, double your revenue. And that represented a really high quality company. That's the Cloud Centaur curve that you see that the Bessemer team mapped out, which says, hey, in 7 years, plus or minus, can you build a substantial company? Well, what we are seeing in the marketplace is a completely different speed of acceleration of the best companies, the 10x founders. There are a handful of companies, like dozens of companies, that are characterized as shooting stars, that are growing at a much more rapid rate. You can see the numbers here, getting to 10 million, 12 million in that first year, and then growing very quickly, only in 3 or 4 years, to that 100 million run rate. And there are very few companies, but there are a few, that are hitting AI supernova. And the supernova companies are getting to that 50 million, 100 million very fast. Coding is the first killer app for AI. And so the platform companies and the AI coding companies have hit that supernova status. There are other categories that are becoming the next killer app. One of them is customer service. Another of them is the world of agentic commerce or AEO instead of SEO. These are categories where every company seems to need to buy one of these. And I think the question that a lot of investors are asking when we meet with entrepreneurs is, are you operating in one of those categories? So that's just a little bit of content that I wanted to share. I want to just recognize, though, that these comments are very AI-centric. And we'll share these slides as well, and I've got some additional information here. These comments are very AI-centric, obviously. Some of you may be working on B2C companies, on clean tech companies, tough tech companies, biotech, health devices. What I would tell you is that although the numbers may be different, the principles of being a 10x founder, leveraging AI in everything you do, and demonstrating that you have a clear competitive moat in a time of great clutter and confusion, those are foundational principles that you will have to prove out. So I think I did that in 6 minutes, Ed. I don't know if I get a passing grade from you, Professor Zimmerman, but that's what I got for you. Thank you very much, everyone.
How's my mic now? Is it okay? All right. Thanks for that, Jeff. I always like those presentations, and I always learn a lot there. And so you've probably figured out everyone on stage up here is an investor. Karen from B Capital, Elliot from Bessemer, Jeff from Flybridge. They all come from some different backgrounds, different experiences, all of which we'll talk about today. But I'll start next to Karen because you chose to sit next to me. So I learned, have a master's in behavioral science and organizational development, which I imagine comes into play every day in what you do. And I know you have a ton of operational experience before you got into investing and are spending a lot of time on governance. But let's start a little bit with the operational experience and scaling both Box and Apple. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I scaled Apple from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. No, but in truth, I got to Box when there was no revenue, zero revenue. So we scaled. I stayed until about 1.5 years after we went public. So there was a lot of scaling that happened there in almost every way that you can think about. The product, the go-to-market. I spent my time on the go-to-market side of the business. Partnerships. I mean, you name it. And I'm struck by some of the parallels that we're living in today. At the time, Box was one of the early cloud companies. It was a crowded space. There were a lot of companies that were vying for the mind share of the enterprise buyer. Guess what? The enterprise buyer did not want cloud. It was really something that we had to evolve into. And I think what we're seeing today is much different. There is almost a fear in the enterprise that if you're not figuring out AI, you're going to be left behind. We just saw Jamie Dimon come out with a statement about that yesterday, and followed very quickly by the Citibank CEO, who was saying, "We are not going to be left behind by this." So, I think it's very interesting how different this era is. The AI era is much different.
Can we go back a little further, because we want to get some personal backstory from each of you. And in your case, you were relatively recently divorced. You were a single mom, and you decided a great thing to do would be to go work for a bunch of 21-year-olds and be employee number 7 at an underfunded startup.
Well, when you put it that way.
Just curious.
Yeah. Well, it was Josh Stein, who was a very good friend of mine, that introduced me to Aaron. And so I had at least like an anchor of someone that I trusted, that I felt like wouldn't steer me terribly wrong. And I have this idea of manifesting things. And in my mind, as a relative newcomer, I think I had been in Silicon Valley for maybe 5 years or 6 years when I joined Box. I had manifested this idea that I was going to join a very early stage startup, and it was going to go public. So maybe I have good manifestation skills, and maybe I am in the 0.001% of the population that got really, really lucky. But I knew that's what I wanted. I don't know why I chose Aaron to partner with along that journey, but it was not going to not happen in my mind. This was happening. We were going to make it happen, and that's where that was. But it was a crazy thing to do with 2 small children. I was, financially responsible for, me and my 2 boys at the time. I have 5 now. I got 3 more the easy way. But yeah, it was a crazy thing to do. But I also felt like if something didn't go right, that I would be able to bounce back. But that's how that happened.
And that is a great story. And you also were, when you think about your organizational psych background or organizational behavior background, is there a reason that you were drawn to that field personally?
Document management, or
No, that you were drawn to that field of study, which does translate into some things about what you are doing in boardrooms and governance, which I know is a passion area for you.
I'll tell you the honest truth about that. I went to an undergrad college that was just a local regional school. I didn't feel like it was going to get me where I wanted to go in life, and I knew that the name Johns Hopkins would get me further than Towson State. But it just goes to show you, I joke with my husband now, who is, prep school, Ivy League MBA, And I'm like, regional Towson State,
Love Towson.
It's a good school, right? You don't need all that to take you where you want to go. But I digress a little bit.
No, I don't think that that's a digression at all. I think that's important. And there was this article that Richard Kirby did in 2016, and then he refreshed it in 2018, called "Where Did You Go to School?" And it reflected that about half of people in venture had degrees from Stanford or Harvard, just Stanford or Harvard. And there was a data set, and in that data set of, I think it was 1,800 venture investors, there was only one HBCU. There were 5 people listed who had attended that HBCU, and Elliot is one of them and is wearing the sweater.
Yes.
True, yeah.
So you want to talk about the sweater, Elliot?
This was a gift from my wife. I don't spend money on clothes, but I do spend money on shoes. So anything above my feet comes from my wife. And when Ralph Lauren did a partnership with Morehouse, she bought me everything and said, "Happy birthday." So, and thank her for that.
And you were just on the sort of personal side.
Yeah,
You were intending to go to Vanderbilt.
that's right.
You want to?
Yeah, so education, big thing in my family. Both of my parents were part of the first integrated class at Vanderbilt, so the first Black students to go. I always kind of chuckle at that because we talk about that as if it was so long ago as my parents, so not that long ago. My dad was the first Black student to get a math degree, which is why I majored in mathematics, and he went on to be a computer engineer at Westinghouse and hit what he called the colored ceiling, which back then basically meant you might be the smartest person in the room, but you're not managing anybody. I think some of that still pervades today, or the gender ceiling, but that's a different panel, I think. So he left with 2 other Black engineers in the 90s, went back to the board members of Vanderbilt and raised his seed round for a software company. So growing up as a kid, that's where I learned how to code, program in DOS, if anyone remembers the old black screen. Fell in love with Sierra computer games. And while I didn't really understand what running a software business was, in our small town of Reston, Virginia, at the peak of roughly 80 employees, it was very interesting as a teenager just run into people at Safeway who worked for your dad's company, or at our church, I think 15 employees worked at the company. And I just had this reverence, obviously it's my dad, but for being a founder. So I thought I was going to go to Vanderbilt until I went down there and saw pictures of my parents at like sit-ins and civil rights marches and their dorm being burned down. And 16-year-old Elliot said, "No, I think I just want to take some classes and maybe join a fraternity. I don't think the civil rights movement in 2002 was where my mind was."
So this is, and I know that there were pictures on the walls at Vanderbilt of your parents with Dr. King.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is his birthday, and Monday is the official federal holiday. And while I don't usually speak with fondness about President Reagan, Reagan is the one who signed the bill in 1983, adding MLK Junior Day to the list of federal holidays. It wasn't officially observed until '86. Arizona continued to oppose it until 1992. And I'm just going to mention that Arizona didn't join the United States as a state until the 20th century. So they weren't. It's not like they were part of the South during the war. And they joined after it cost them $500 million in revenue because the NFL, which I don't actually follow, but I did follow this. The NFL said, "You're not doing MLK Day. We're not doing the Super Bowl here. We're going to California," and that's probably when we knew that MLK Day had product market fit nationally.
Yeah.
But sometimes it takes a while, but it is kind of remarkable to see the role that your parents played in desegregating Vanderbilt, and I understand that was a formative and painful experience. And you also did a thread on Twitter about it some years ago, in 2021.
Yeah.
Back at
I'll chime in on one thing, particularly on MLK, because on MLK Day, I send the same thing to all the founders that I'm partnered with, which was around finding your zone of genius. We talked about like being a 10X founder in the age of AI, but still finding your zone of genius is, I think, how we all get there. And for MLK, if you go to Morehouse, which is where MLK went for his undergraduate, you learn a lot about him. And you see his first year's report card. He's actually a C&D student, like across the board, except for two things. One was he got an A in religion, and the other was oratory. That's your fucking zone of genius. And as a co-founder of the modern civil rights movement, I think he found his zone of genius and leaned into it. And I think the reason I send that report card to all the founders I work with is we're all just trying to figure it out. But if you can find that one or two things that make you unique inside of your company, in your market, in what you're building, like really lean into that. So sorry to take us on a side note.
And unfortunately, I'm going to take us a little deeper since you mentioned his academic performance.
Yeah.
So when King went to Morehouse, Morehouse was in crisis. I'm sure you know more about this than I do, because World War II was depleting the potential student base, and they decided quite radically to admit much younger students and to lower the bar academically. And so King went there when he was really should have been in high school still.
Like 15. 16.
And he went to Crozier to get a master's, and that is where he really lit up before going to, so at Crozier, I think he was the valedictorian.
Yeah.
And I think the point is, like, academically, he was firing on every cylinder. It just, he just needed another couple of years to fill that out. And the last thing that I'll mention on this topic for now is because, we are where we are in the calendar, but also last night, Claudette Colvin passed away, and Claudette Colvin, as many of you know, was arrested for sitting in the white section of the bus before Rosa Parks. And in 2021, she petitioned to have that juvenile conviction expunged from her record. And I'll just leave it with one quote. "My conviction for standing up for my constitutional right terrorized my family and relatives, who knew only that they were not to talk about my arrest and conviction because people in town knew me as that girl from the bus." And she lived in New York for many years because she was told that it was not safe for her to go back anywhere near where she was from, and the conviction was still hanging out there. So it is an interesting time when she passes a day before his birthday, and I just thought we should commemorate that. But so 20 years as a venture investor.
Yep.
You want to talk a little bit about that trajectory?
So
you make that transition.
I can't, so he's got to.
Well, the easiest part is my wife always reminds me I have no transferable skills, which is true. This is the only thing I've ever done. My dream was actually to be an entrepreneur like my dad. I was supposed to go, so I put Vanderbilt to the side undergrad. I thought I was supposed to go to Virginia Tech to do a master's in computer science, had a full ride, was ready to go. And then in my senior year at Morehouse in the math department, my senior thesis was in radial neural networks applied to stock market data, which is crazy because for like 16 years of my venture career, no one cared. And now like neural networks, it like works. I get to send this old paper. But back then we were running backpropagation algorithms on like on-prem Sun servers, and the compute was so slow that we would load up the models and we couldn't see the outputs until the next day. So it's like funny, like being where we are now, having that experience. And I took that senior thesis, used it to get into graduate school, and I was going to start a financial services software company, really because I had a chip on my shoulder about all the business and finance friends of mine that were going to Wall Street and coming back with new clothes and watches. In the math department, I was like, these guys don't even know math. They just know finance or whatever that is. So it just so happened that one of the board members of Spelman College ran a venture fund, heard about my research and gave me a summer internship. And then a week before I was supposed to go to Blacksburg for Virginia Tech, they asked me to defer. And I've been deferring for 19 years. So that's the short version. I guess the one nuance I would say to be a bit more serious, I started my career in early stage investing, seed and Series A. As a mathematician, I realized that I was starting to connect and add more value with our companies when they were raising their Series B and starting to scale. And post a small break, I did go back to college and do my MBA here at Columbia Business School, but I switched to more growth stage investing. So while in 2025, I still led 3 seed deals, and that's kind of where my heart is given my childhood upbringing. I primarily do Series B and C, and there's a lot in between, but we don't have enough time for that.
All right. Jeff, you want to talk a little bit about your background? You were an entrepreneur and then went into venture, and you also spent some time around academia as a kid.
Yeah. Does this work?
Yeah, and sorry
I'm a little
about
gun shy now about my.
Sorry
mic.
about the microphone
No.
issues before.
So I'm a little self-conscious about saying this with what Elliot just said, but I predate Elliot by a lot of years in that I went to college in the late 80s and I studied computer science and I studied neural nets.
Love that.
So if you think this AI stuff has like just been around for a few years, 4 decades ago,
Yep.
I was doing computer vision and natural language processing and all sorts of other sort of things and that rhyme with today's technology platforms. Of course, I didn't, really take as much advantage of it as I should have. I ended up being an internet entrepreneur after business school and had a great run at a couple of venture-backed companies. One that went public in the 1.0 days in the mid-90s. That was you'd now call it a unicorn, and then early success story, also venture-backed in the early 2000s that was acquired by Sallie Mae. Both of those companies were backed by a number of VC firms, including Greylock. And in 2002, 2003, as Greylock was shifting west, 2 of the Greylock Boston partners spun out, and with me, we formed Flybridge. And so after a roughly 10-year career as a founder-operator, I hung up the spurs, went to the dark side, and became a venture capitalist. And we do seed investing only in AI, so I went back to my AI roots. We had AI as one of our main areas of focus for the last 15 or 20 years, but really our only focus in the last 3 or 4 years. And as a seed stage investor centered in New York and Boston, that means we write $1, $2, $3 million checks at the earliest stages of company formation, and then partner with great firms like Bessemer and B Capital as the companies mature into Series A, Series B.
So one of the great opportunities that you have as someone who has built a venture brand, a franchise, a number of funds. I know you're now deploying out of a brand new fund. Congratulations on that. Is the opportunity to back founders that you have backed before. And so are you really saying to those founders, if it's, we backed you in this health tech company 5 years ago, or we backed you in this fintech company 12 years ago, you're now saying if it isn't an AI native company, we're not going to back you for a second or third time?
Yes, but it's pretty easy to spin yourself as an AI company, as many of you know.
So you're literally advertising how gullible you are, or what? I'm not sure what the takeaway is there.
Just saying it's pretty easy. And, we really are laser focused on AI and probably more than B2B and enterprise oriented than B2C, but that's just, the world we live in. So just like give you a couple quick examples. We were the lead Series A investor in MongoDB here in New York. My partner Chip is still on the board of MongoDB. 16, 17 years later, even though we, post IPO, we're long out of the company. One of his fellow board members, who previously was an IT services executive, is starting an AI company. We'll rinse and repeat all day long the idea of great leaders surrounded by who have seen what success looks like and who want to build big and successful AI companies. Another quick example, I also like the entrepreneurs who have done something good but not exceptional. They built something that saw some success. So we were the lead investors in Firebase. That company sold very successfully to Google, but it didn't go all the way to a public offering. One of the founders there started a new AI company called Tasklet. We're very excited to be behind him. Another entrepreneur started a company that he sold to Okta in the identity and security space. We backed him to start an agentic security company called Arcade. He's looking to do it again and do it at a bigger scale. So we love first-time founders. We back a lot of people out of Harvard and MIT, and we love repeat founders as well, as long as they can put .ai in their company name.
And
That's all it takes.
And when you say you have these founders who had like an okay or a pretty good exit, and then you're willing to go back in, are you looking for, I'm going to try to phrase this very precisely, if not politely, are you looking for them to have a chip on their shoulder about it?
Yeah, I think that we tend to be a little bit East Coast bias. As I said, we're centered in New York and Boston. And I think in general, East Coast founders have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. I think New York is always looking at the Valley and looking at the success stories. Boston is looking at the Valley. Boston and New York kind of look at each other. We have a running, bid on that.
It's funny because New York doesn't actually give a shit about Boston.
Yeah.
I don't know why you would think.
It's funny you say that. I know you don't follow the NFL, Ed, but what are you doing this Sunday? Are you watching any home teams? And no, you're not. By the way, in a couple of weeks, Ed, what are you doing in a couple of weeks, Feb? I think it's like 14th, maybe coming up to
Valentine's Day?
Yeah, maybe it's not 15th of Feb. You're coming up to Boston. Yes, you are coming to Boston. Now I remember. Because you will be my guest at HBS, just like Elliot has been my guest as well.
Visit.
Anyway, where was I?
So we're talking about the diploma mill at which you work.
Folks in Boston have a chip on their shoulder. Entrepreneurs in New York have a chip on their shoulder. Everybody looks at Silicon Valley as the model. AI has certainly been an accelerant of that. All the big AI companies arguably are centered in the Valley. So we love entrepreneurs with a chip on their shoulder, yes, who want to prove themselves to be different. The MongoDB team was a great example of that.
So Karen, we've gotten halfway through your story. We did your origin story, we did Box, but I'd love you to also have the opportunity to tell us how you got into B Capital, how that's gone, and what you're doing now. But I'd also love, I think some of what, Jeff, you were telling us about is everyone can tell the story that they're an AI company. And you and I talked a little bit about storytelling and how important that is for founders to position themselves in the right way. So if you could maybe tell us about that too a little bit.
Sure. I love that we are now talking about storytelling as something that is, essential. And Wall Street Journal just ran an article about it in the past couple of weeks, and there are lots and lots of instances of job postings that talk about the need for storytelling, and content, I think, is so important as a strategy, not only on the company side, but also on the venture side. But I think I mean, not to get too boring about the manifestation thing, but I think I manifested venture too. When I was at Box, I was part of the team that was responsible for making sure we had enough money. I helped raise the money, and so I saw what the other side of the table looked like, and I thought it was pretty cool. So I thought to myself, well, when I'm done on the operating side, I'll look at venture. And I got really lucky on that front, not only because the timing was perfect for me. I was wrapping up my time at Apple, but it was when Allraise was launching, and there were more voices in the room saying the room should look more like this room looks today. Like a lot more females, a lot more diversity in the room, and that was when I started talking to venture funds, and B Capital was a great fit for me at the time. It was very small. To me, there are several parallels in my operating time as there are in my venture time, because we were a $365 million fund when I joined, and we're about $8.5 billion or so today. So we have grown a lot. We've added new strategies and new products along the way, and I'm really proud to have been part of at least some of those new lines. And venture has really changed a lot. It really has changed a lot in the last couple of years. The fund sizes are getting large. The check sizes are different. What did you call it, Jeff, when it was the seed strapped companies? Like we never saw that. that the series are all getting kind of mixed up a little bit, and it's a very interesting time to be in venture. I am transitioning personally from an active investing role to a board partner role. I found that I love the governance side. I think there are lots of areas where founders, if it's a first-time founder, they're obviously going to be first-time chairs of the board or CEOs of the board, and there's a lot to learn. There's a lot that you don't know. There's a lot that can make running a board meeting so much better if you have somebody there to kind of guide you and give you insights and to help you with best practices around that. And so I'm loving that. I have some companies that are early that I've written checks into that, of course, as an investor, you almost automatically get a board seat, like it or not. And then I've taken on some later stage companies in the 200 to 300 million of ARR that are reinventing themselves in the AI era, and that's been super fun as well.
So to really all of you, but I know it's a particular interest for you as well as Elliot, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you get the right fit between the investor board member and the founder? How do you figure out if that's right? And then for our founders in the room, how do you appropriately leverage and build that relationship toward the end of achieving scaling and product market fit? How do you work with that team?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take a stab at that. I'm pretty transparent in terms of my values. That's like the most important thing to me. And I just don't compromise on them. Before I make any investment, I share with them my values contract. And if it doesn't align with them, I'm okay with that. Sometimes it can be less than ideal with some of my partners where we decide, oh man, this is a company that we should really be partnered with. And I just say, well, if someone else wants to do it, that's fine. But we've gone down this path. It's really hard to switch at the end of the day. But my view, similar to what you were sharing, is if your values aligned, when we hit like the big things, how we treat customers, how we treat employees, how we treat executives, how we treat cash management, we have a lot more time to worry about the big things if our values are aligned and we're not wasting all the time that gets wasted in board meetings talking about the little things that we are misaligned on. And I'm just willing, it's right on my Twitter, or you can read it, I send it to you, and if it's not a fit, it's not a fit. So that's one side, and then if we can get past that, my view is like the most interesting founders I work with are just uniquely themselves, and I'm that way. I don't fit this industry. I'm the black guy at the firm, like I understand that. And that's what makes me unique. I'm not trying to do anything else. People always ask me about my shoes. For those who've seen the Bulls documentary, The Last Dance, I try to explain this to my partners all the time. Imagine Michael Jordan in the locker room for Game 7 of a playoff series putting Allbirds on. I think that's like just not the right energy. So I think just leaning into who you are, what makes you special, and if that doesn't fit with the founder too, that's okay. I think that's perfectly fine. But the amount of time you spend as a venture capitalist dealing with late night phone calls, emails, lawsuits, when you partnered with someone that you knew before you did this person, he or she, is probably misaligned with me, it's just not worth it. And I've reached this point in my life probably 10, 12 years ago where I stopped doing that.
And you talked about in an interview the difference between cultural fit and cultural add.
Oh yeah.
And also have said that you won't invest in a founder who hasn't spent real time talking about their values. How often do you encounter founders who you feel haven't spent a lot of time thinking about their values? Because isn't that, going back to Jeff's, like everyone can say, that they're an AI company. People can say that they have values. Yeah. How do you know that someone's been really, really thoughtful about it?
Yeah, I do diligence on it. Oftentimes you find companies that have like an About Us page and they talk about their values, but if you ask an employee or an executive, a top 10 employee about it, they're like, what website is that? Can you send me the link? Well, that kind of like lets you know that it's not that important, but they felt like it was something performative for them to do. On the cultural ad piece, the amount of times that I'm partnering with a company, and I've had so many conversations with the founder that says, Elliot, like, really excited to partner with you, but I just want to be transparent. I can't contemplate having a black person on my board. I don't have a black person in leadership at my company. I say, well, let's talk about that. And that goes for the same thing at my firm, where I tell my partners and my colleagues, well, let's stop hiring for cultural fit, because I'm not a cultural fit, but let's start hiring for values fit. And let's actually start scoring people on cultural ads. How can we extend the fabric of the firm? Because going back to that Richard Kirby report, he's my oldest friend in venture. Our wives actually went to high school together here in New York. If 50% of the industry comes from 2 schools, and the industry's performance is kind of, that means a lot of those people suck at this job. So I think mathematically we might want to open the aperture to who we're hiring. And you find a lot of that same thing happens in the startup ecosystem where, because this person worked at this company or went to this school, that's the only person we can go to. But what you actually find is in every success story, it's people that don't come from that archetype that really got the company through the toughest times. And those are the people that you can stitch the success throughput line to. So that's my view.
So I want to go back to product market fit, and Jeff's presentation was really helpful. I'd like to get a little more granular about what does that look like today, right? When an enterprise customer is trying to assess who's got product market fit, and you're an investor, you're looking at these companies, they've got some early customers. What does it mean? What does it look like?
I can kick that off. So, look, everyone is doing a lot of pilots. There's a lot of AI theater going on in enterprises. And so the key question that we ask ourselves is there a path to enterprise-wide deployment? Are you seeing usage increase? Are you seeing this sort of wildfire effect where the product might begin with a few users in one department and then begins to spread, which, MongoDB and Firebase were good examples of that in the cloud era. So those are the kinds of things we look for, and you always want to see a bit more pull versus push in marketing activities, a lot of organic demand, a lot of organic energy. But really the essence of it is, are customers, sounds very simple, are customers using the product, getting value out of the product, and do they keep wanting to use more and more of it? On the consumer side, there's this classic analysis that you look at of the cohorts. And you look at the cohorts on the B2B side as well, but on the consumer side, really looking at logins and actions and activities, not downloads. Downloads is a vanity metric, but the actual usage of a product over time and how much attrition you see month after month versus continued usage and a continued sense of stickiness. If you look at the best companies, you see this U-shaped behavior where the product, you might shake out some early customers in the beginning, but whether it's a B2B or B2C situation, you've got this increased usage over time and this magic dynamic of more users, net dollar retention or net customer engagement being greater and greater over time. One of the reasons Duolingo is one of the most valuable and successful B2C companies out there is because it has this incredible sort of usage pattern and behavior after it shakes out people who are just fooling around with the language app. So those are the kinds of things that we and others look at for signs, real tangible signs of product market fit.
Elliot, do you want to talk about a tractor company?
I would just, I would be delighted to. I'm going to give two riffs on what you said because you nailed it. In the firm, there was this period where three different teams of young people were looking at an AI space saying, Elliot, we've got to invest in all 3 of these companies. Now, they're saying it separately. All the companies were in a similar space. And having seen the pitch of all of them, I called them into a conference room and I put the customer slides up on the screen of each company. And they were almost exactly the same. So to Jeff's point, we're still shaking out this era of what I call EARR, which is experimental ARR, which is a lot of boards gave CIOs, CTOs, CFOs a budget to go spend on AI stuff, and they still are trying to shake out what's the return on that investment. And I think that will actually play out for years because the technology, we're still living in the early stages of that technology. So to Jeff's point, we talk a lot about product user fit and what diligence questions do we have to ask to make sure that does the end user enjoy using this product? Does it make them happier at doing their job? Does it make them more effective at using their job? If you can't answer those 3 things in today's AI era, you just have no chance. And then I would just share the other example, which is that product market fit never ends. Like you're constantly having to find it. The largest investment I've ever made in my career is in a company called Canva in the design space. Melanie Perkins is the most dynamic CEO I've ever had the pleasure of working with. But 3 years ago, flying to a board meeting in Australia, she basically said, you all have the slides. I don't want to talk about the performance of the company. We have to talk about the impact of AI on our product market fit because it could be gone in 12 months. So me, the CEO, CPO, CTO are getting an Airbnb in San Francisco, and we're going to figure out our AI strategy. This is probably the greatest presentation I've ever got from a CEO. And at the time, this is like a $2.5 billion ARR business that was profitable, growing 60%. She could have said, like, I'm not even going to spend a whole lot of time on this. And this is early. And they were the first venture-backed startup to announce an official partnership with OpenAI, like before everyone. So I always like to share that example because even when you feel like you've got that momentum, the product is never finished. And you constantly, the same questions we ask about product user fit, you have to constantly be asking that, and that goes back to the usage data. And last week, for a Series B investment I'm leading that I'll announce next week, we did a full confirmatory diligence session just on usage data and patterns and half-life of users, not customers, of users. And the founder said, you're the first person to ask me this stuff. I said, well, I want the raw data, and I want to sit down with your team and really parse through it to figure out, like, is any of this stuff going to retain or expand? Because we don't know a lot of the time in these investments. So I guess that's the perspective I would share.
When you're pre-product market fit, and you're getting users, and you are about to put in place something that is going to cost money, when is it right to start? Like, how do you know? What metrics do you guys look at to understand, yes, this is the time to like start charging people for something? How do you balance user acquisition versus driving revenue, extracting value from the users?
Well, you go ahead.
Sorry, how do you talk about extracting value from users?
How do you decide when you're ready, right? Because as you know, there are lots of business models where you want to onboard enough users, and then you're going to start adding cost to them, like a freemium model,
Yep.
right? And you know that when you start charging people, you're going to hurt your user acquisition, and your user retention.
I mean, it depends on how you do it, obviously, right? It depends. With a freemium model, which is truly what we're seeing very often. Has anybody used Lovable? Lovable's got a great freemium model. You go in, you use a little bit, you're like just at the point of like really getting into it, and they're like, hey, guess what? You have to pay now. But those are the models that over time are going to be impactful. If the person's going to pay, they're going to pay right then and there because they're in the middle of something. And so it's a great time to capture them. But the figuring out the right models on that for various products is going to be, I think, complex. When do you figure out how to charge them? When we were at Box, we had a freemium model, and we loved it when people had some usage. But we figured out what were the conversion tactics to get them to the paid version, and we also went top down in the organization. And we figured out, when the CEOs had a compelling need for the product. So, and I think we're going to see versions of that emerge as well, where we see a lot of people doing the proof of concept. Sometimes they pay for it. If they're not paying for it, I think they should be in almost all cases, maybe not every single one. The freemium model and then the top-down approach, I think we're going to see versions of that emerge, and figuring out how to charge is going to be the tough one. It was pretty easy in cloud era. You would just charge per seat, per month, and maybe have an enterprise model or something like that. That model's that's going to break down today. So we know that we're going to see new models emerging. There are already a ton out there. And it's going to be a combination of, how much is it costing to get the right large language models, to get the right, compute power and all of that, and how do you pass that along in a way that still yields profit in the end?
This is my favorite topic, so if I can. This is like,
No, let's skip Elliot. Please, go ahead.
I was truly talking to a founder about this today. I'm going to use the base 44 example. That company was built on one of my portfolio companies called Render. And it's agentic workflows for DevOps. Now you say, well, that sounds pretty boring. What's really unique about this AI moment, like if you just go 30,000 feet, the SaaS market globally is about $300 billion in software spend every year. But I think what is like tough to talk about societally is what's happening with AI and agentic solutions is we're now eating into labor spend. So I want to just take a minute and talk about this for a product market fit. So if you're running some software solution and it's freemium or PLG, in Render's case, they give you a good amount of free services, and then they say, you know, it seems like your company running on Render Base 44 is starting to grow. As you grow, you're going to need to hire DevOps people to manage the data infrastructure of your company. But if you pay for this, here's the ROI calculator on every net new human you need to add to run your infrastructure stack. And this is what we're going to charge you to do that. And this is what there are companies now with agentic workflows that are able to articulate what the ROI is before you pay or at the time you're being asked to pay. And that's something that I'm not really sure we were able to do in the past, but it's, again, because of companies like Claude and Anthropic, we're able to see human labor being augmented and disrupted. And I don't think we're going to get into the societal impacts of that. But seeing a company like Base 44, he actually invested in the most recent round of Render personally because he said, I didn't hire 9 people at my company because of Render. And that goes back to what Jeff opened with, which is you can be a 10x entrepreneur by using these solutions that don't require you to go hire a bunch of DevOps entrepreneurs, even though your business is working. Now, there's some gross margin impacts that I don't want to go into the minutia of, but I think the ability to reverse engineer what the ROI should be for your user at the time you're asking them to pay should be your North Star for when you start to charge and how much your customer should be willing to pay.
I'll just say one thing on Elliot's comment. So the $300 billion a year SaaS market, we did an analysis of how much of the payroll is automatable. Looking at all the SIC codes, our assessment was it's about $2 trillion, a little over $2 trillion. So if you think about the expansion of the total available market or TAM for the companies we're investing in, for the companies you're creating, you all are no longer going after the IT budget, you're going after the entire budget. You're going after all the staffing budget. And if you can justify that you're displacing DevOps, sales, marketing, customer service, CIOs, chiefs of staff, whatever, you can really increase your willingness to pay. And we have a portfolio company that's doing this in the software development space called Blitzy, which is in this new category. The AI coding category has, of course, the vibe coding platforms like Lovable and Replit and Base 44. There's the development environments like Cursor and Copilot, and then there's the more, let's say, call it custom engineering and code migration environments, which is where Blitzy is playing. And that's a world where, if you said, what's a migration to cloud going to cost? A lot of people, a lot of SAP consultants thrown at that, a lot of time. If you can have a week-long or 4 or 5 day long series of thousands of agents doing that work, you're going to certainly be willing to pay a great amount of money. So I think this idea of labor displacement is really powerful. It's the moment we're in. It does have societal implications. Just before the holidays, one comment on that, I wrote a blog post where I said, I think that unemployment, actually I'd love to get everybody's take on this. 2030, year 2030, what do you think the unemployment rate will be in the US? My prediction was 8 to 10%, as compared to 4.5% today. What would you predict?
Probably about 8 or 9.
Maybe 7 to 8. I'm going to go just a little bit
A little
lower
lower,
than
7 or
that.
8%? That's like tectonic levels of unemployment.
And you're
It is
measuring
Huge
that,
shift.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to, as a supporting point to that, but also in some ways thinking about it just slightly differently. It's going to be a long time before we are able to run our businesses without human judgment. So I don't think anybody debates that. Mm-hmm. I'm worried about the middle gap of entry-level people who are being replaced,
100%.
not learning what they need to learn to have the judgment, that they are going to need to be in senior level roles. So that's going to be a gap that needs to be addressed somehow. But I also think that the real opportunity here is reimagining, and we've talked about this. We've touched on this, during the course of this panel. But reimagining what the jobs are. The way stuff gets done today is historically because of roadblocks or legal reasons or other sorts of blockers in an organization. And if you think about how information needs to flow through an organization to make a decision, I love thinking about like either healthcare or mortgages and all of the documentation and all the stuff that need to happen and had to happen in order. If you took all of the rules away from how things had to be done in the past, what would it look like today? And that's where the opportunity lies. And that's where I have hope that that it won't kick that many people out of the system. It will create different pieces of the system. So we'll revisit this in 4 years.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
I have a number of questions. One is, I don't know how many of that 8 to 10% currently reside in Greenland, our soon-to-be territory. But sorry. I'm sorry, I'm just angry. But are you, like, number one, what are you doing about it, or what should be done about it? And number two, when you look at the overlay of the political calendar, I don't necessarily like some of what that likely will lead to, in addition to all of the other things that are deeply problematic about a tripling of unemployment. But what is to be done about it? Because there's certainly a way of thinking about this where, for law firms, for instance, I think AI is going to help us eliminate a lot of the rote, low-value work that, frankly, we don't want to do.
Yeah.
And so it's less of a displacement. We have to make sure that we find ways to be good at training our junior people, who often get stuck with, but like, I hand blacklined when I was a summer associate or a first-year associate. And then people trusted computerized blacklining, right? Like, it changes, and that's fine, right? So what should be done, and how should we be preparing for that?
So you're now asking a bit of a policy question, so I'll veer into that area, but this is shaky ground, I will say. So I think there are a handful of things that we're going to see happen, and I think policymakers are quite slow at thinking about these issues, but hopefully we'll have a wave of leadership that is, thinking about these issues in the right way. I think we're going to see more emphasis on national service. There was a moment where employing citizens in work in the country in the FDR era was an incredibly powerful way of creating not only opportunities but also infrastructure that was ultimately had a multiplier effect. We have a lot of work in this country that needs to be done, and I think there could be a moment there. There was actually an initiative out of DC by a nonprofit called Noble Gen, called Tech Gen or Tech Serve. That's a way of having engineers, software developers, technical professionals serve in the US government. It's very hard for the federal government to recruit excellent young talent. So you could imagine more initiatives around national service, like what City Year did for many years in a very innovative way. I think we're going to see more solopreneurs, individual entrepreneurs, like, there's the running, meme about podcasters didn't exist 30 years ago. Now we've got all these people making money on podcasting. Shopify sellers, a company that Elliot invested in, Shopify sellers didn't exist 30 years ago. Now we've got all these incredible entrepreneurs, solopreneurs that are sellers on the internet and doing Etsy-like businesses. We're going to see a lot more of that. And so policymakers have to shift healthcare policy and other policies to enable that world to flourish. And the third and final thing I'll say is I think we're going to see more of the kind of hard technical services, electricians, plumbers, landscapers, physical therapists. Those are areas where there's a ton of demand, and I think vocational schools right now are seeing a lot of demand. Those jobs are going to not be replaced by AI anytime soon, despite the AI massage therapist. I think that robot that's
Robotics.
startup that's floating around. But I think those are going to be, we're going to see a growth in those types of jobs as well. So, the labor and humans are pretty adaptable. We've adapted before, agrarian economy adaptation, information economy adoption. I just think this is happening too fast for us all to adopt as a country. And so that's why I don't think it's going to be 15 to 20%, but I do think it's going to be 8 to 10%, and there's going to be a lot of dislocation.
Meredith, you want to salvage that happy thought?
Yikes.
Your job is safe. You're good.
Yeah, because I'm already trained, but we've got some kids coming up. So let's go back to product market fit a little bit, and let's talk about what can go wrong. And you've talked some, Karen, about timing can go really wrong. So I'd love to hear about that. And the other thing I'd love to hear about is are there any moats left? What's exciting?
There are always moats. We've learned, that's history will teach us that. There's something that we can't see yet or haven't heard about yet or haven't thought about differently yet. But we talked about this a little bit, Elliot, you and me, and I think in some respects today, if you do have paying customers and you are kind of finding your way through product market fit, part of your moat are your customers today, which is slightly different than it has been before. I think that it can't be overstated. Those folks that are early on paying you, using your product, loving your product, are incredibly important. And not everybody has that right now. So let's really honor the customers and make sure that we're doing what we need for them. But I think it's clearly the product has to be great and it has to be differentiated and you have to be able to sell it. And I also would love to look 4 or 5 years into the future to see how marketing and sales evolves to accommodate, this whole new cycle.
My view is none of the traditional moats exist in this moment. I think they'll come back in some form or fashion, but of the, I think, 4 that Jeff walked us through, I think unfortunately founder execution is the only one that's left right now. Every month, 3 times a month, our large investment out of the fund I manage is in Anthropic. And every month we get a first view of what's about to be presented at some product launch. And every month I see the demo and I go back to 50 companies I've seen pitch and I literally just say, oh man, this is really challenging for them now. The same goes for when Gemini does a demo day. The same goes for when OpenAI does a demo day. But the founders that are able to navigate that, it's purely on execution. Because their mindset is every time a demo day happens, how am I going to leverage that technology on the edge to make my solution better? And those are the founders that we've seen the last 2 or 3 years that have really navigated just the most unique technology shift that I've seen in my 20 years of doing this. And then maybe the only traditional one that still exists today right now is distribution. If you have some unique distribution angle that your competitive set can't get, or it's exclusive, or some proprietary relationship, I think that's the only other one that exists. But I'm seeing more and more startups in their storytelling, direct to consumer, you can kind of move around that differently from 5 or 10 years ago. So, we're trying, I think, just like Jeff, trying to quantify what does that founder and team execution look like in today's environment. You sometimes just know it when you see it through the conversations. But my biggest, I'll try to end with an example. So 2 companies, or a company that we invested in 4 or 5 months ago, they're the number 2 in their space by size, by customer count, by funds raised, by ARR. And when I met with the number 1 player, I looked at the team composition. They were probably about 100 employees, let's say, and they only had 15 engineers. That was a very big red flag for me to be an AI company with 15 engineers. I met the number 2 in the space. They had about 60 employees, and about 55 of them were engineers. And the 3 co-founders were actually ex-real-time strategy gamers. And in my conversations with them, they were processing 3 or 4 conversations at once. They were just completely different from the archetype of the other founding team and leadership team. And I think that type of mindset, DNA, and founder velocity, I think is what you talked about. Like the velocity by which they're processing new technology releases, data, and how they run their business is what led us to back that team despite them being number 2 in the space, and they're quickly changing that. So I think for everyone sitting here, trying to figure out what does founder velocity mean for you and in the areas where you're uniquely positioned, like that's what matters in today's environment.
Karen, so part of the execution that Elliot's talking about is the go-to-market strategy. And we haven't talked as much about go-to-market. And in late 2022, Bessemer talked about centaurs, and they gave the characteristics of centaurs and what you needed in order to actually become a $100 million ARR business. And one of them was scalable go-to-market. We talked previously about doing things, not just the storytelling, but events and going out and networking. And you told a story in an interview you did some time ago about how you just swamped people at Dell. Everybody at Dell knew you, and Box was this total underdog that Dell did this deal with, and that was transformational. Can you talk a little bit about like a marketing strategy, an event strategy, a like networking like crazy strategy that actually is the kind of good execution that can lead to real growth? I know it's a real strength of yours.
Well, thank you. It's a lot to tackle because it depends on the size of the company, how much money you have, what space you're in. I know enterprise. So I talk about it from that perspective. And my approach at Box was make yourself look big, even when you're small. So there was an approach of kind of pervasiveness or be everywhere, and that was my strategy. Obviously, you have to do that in a very carefully thought out way, because at 10 or 12 people, which is when we won the Dell deal, we didn't have a lot of money and we didn't have a lot of people, and we frankly didn't know a lot about what we were going to be when we grew up. But the idea is there, and I think partnerships were a massive part of that strategy, and the events can follow the partnerships because you're announcing something and you have to really string together a whole lot of conceptual opportunities and ideas with each announcement that you do. We're seeing a ton of partnerships in the AI space. 2 + 1 = 3. But behind that is, how do you announce it? What's the story you're telling? How do you make it compelling? How are you going to get customers out of that announcement? And so there's a lot of opportunity, complexity, and strategy behind all of those things. But you don't do an event, as much as I love a good party, you don't do an event just to do an event. You've got to have a rationale behind it. You have to have, I always like, even if you do a party and you invite 100 people, even if only 10 show up, all those 100 people got your invitation. So you still had a message that went across. And it might not have been the exact outcome that you wanted, but you're still sending a message to the market. Partnerships, I think, are a very strong way to do that today. But again, you've got to have meat behind it, and you've got to understand what that joint partnership will serve to accomplish over time, and have objectives and have goals and really be very strategic about it.
Are there ways that you folks have seen people execute particularly well, or people maybe go astray on this thread?
I mean, one thing I'll observe is that people love authentic stories. And Elliot talked about authentic founders and finding your zone of genius. And I think people love hearing about building in public and transparency. And so people, I think many very effective founders are just putting out there their story and their journey and sharing that journey in a very compelling way. Be memorable, be compelling. And so I would just encourage all of you to find your niche audience, and whatever the right channel is, whether it's LinkedIn or X or what have you, and be really memorable and compelling, and just build a relationship with that audience by sharing your story and sharing your journey.
I'm going to take the other side of this one. This is like my least favorite trend, I think, in the startup ecosystem and venture ecosystem, by the way. So yes, it is easier for you to be the face of your company, maybe even like the CMO of your company, get your story out there authentically. But in my experience, it's way more powerful when your customers are telling your story. And we're like in this weird place because I think of podcasting where everyone can pick up a fucking mic and like turn a camera on and like talk. But then there's this interesting thing that happens, which is you release your product, it gets in the hands of some users, and then they start telling a different story. And like there's the branding, which is what you tell the market about your company, yourself, and the story. But then what's way more important is what's the reputation, which is what they say about you. And like some founders in today's market are not doing enough to like figure out what's the delta between what I'm saying about myself and what my customers, users, and market are saying. And you can get so lost in just like recording and staring at yourself and saying things, and then you lose touch with what your customers are saying about you and your company. And every company that I've been a part of, particularly the biggest ones, like Melanie at Canva, if you ever go to their user conference, she barely speaks. It's literally their biggest power users, just speaking from the smallest power user to Disney. They just talk the entire time. It's been like that since the day I met her. I think Toby at Shopify, when I teach at Columbia Business School, I always end with a picture of Harley, who's an early employee COO, and Toby. Harley's at the front of their user concert, DJing and emceeing the entire thing. Toby's in the back with headphones on, coding the core product. Like, sometimes being authentic is just doing what you do really well and letting someone else be the front man or woman. And like, we're in this trend where everyone's like, be a storyteller, hire a storyteller. Well, maybe that's not the right thing for you. Maybe you should hire someone who can get your user base and evangelists to tell your story for you, and that might be the most authentic thing. So I feel like we're pushing a lot of founders to do this thing because it's in vogue, but there's a lot of cases where it's like not actually working outside of the likes on LinkedIn. So just take the other side of that.
Anyone want to respond to that?
Well, I think that's the same idea of a story. It doesn't have to be you telling the story. It's how do you tell your company story. And telling your company story 100% should include users and customers and other people who are maybe your partners or whatever it is. But I think sometimes that gets lost in the mix. What are we doing here? Why are we doing this? Why are we passionate about this? And so I do think it's a good thing to have as your North Star.
So I'm going to do two quick things, and then I'll hand it to Meredith to wrap up. But one is I like the idea of telling someone else's story if it resonates with you, particularly if it's in your quirky zone of niche interest about which you are very passionate. And for me, I'll use one example. I am extremely passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also about wine. And I can't help but note that my friend Ikemi Dubose-Woodson is in the back of the room. She's the co-founder, CEO of the Roots Fund, which is a terrific nonprofit that gets people of color into the wine and beverage industry. She's built an incredible board here and overseas with some of the best winemakers in the world participating, and is a real power and force. And if people want to, and she's very approachable, so if people do want to learn more, seek her out, or think about partnerships, lighten your wallet, whatever, you should definitely go talk to Ikemi in the back of the room. I know that we also, are a law firm and should be talking about legal issues, since Meredith and I spend lots of our time talking about legal issues. We also know that these are problems that we can't solve for our clients and for the startups and venture funds and growth companies that we work with, whether in our Palo Alto office on the screen there, or in the overflow room in our New York office, where several dozen people are also attending this event down the hall. So we really appreciate having expertise brought in from folks like you to help solve these problems and answer these questions. So, Meredith, where do you want to take us as we wrap up?
Yeah, this was really terrific, and thank you for your time and your insights, Karen, Elliot, and Jeff. I'm hoping that Stephen Colbert wrapped his taping on time, which would mean that we would have Lewis and Amber here in New York with us. Hopefully they'll be performing for us in just a few minutes, and we'll have some of Ed's very good wine. But thank you all for being here today. To those of you in Palo Alto, thanks for coming in over there. And let's stay in touch. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.